for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Last week, while we were in recess, I traveled through my district and had the opportunity to appear on local television and to speak at civic clubs. Every time I mentioned that we have an $18 trillion debt, Eastern North Carolinians were astounded and could not believe it. To put the debt in perspective, on January 20th of 2009, the total federal debt stood at $10.6 trillion. As of last Friday, May 8, 2015, it has risen to $18.2 trillion, an increase of $7.5 trillion. Our debt now stands at over $200,000 for every full-time private sector worker. I agree with my constituents that it is time Congress stop passing legislation that is not paid for. Republicans have control of both chambers of Congress now because voters want us to cut the debt and deficit and stop passing legislation that is not paid for. In an April article of Forbes magazine, Stan Collender wrote, and I quote, "If you haven't noticed that Congress is about to increase the federal deficit substantially, you haven't been watching carefully or at all. Virtually every policy change that has already or soon will be considered seriously in the House and Senate will make the deficit higher rather than lower." He further writes, and I quote, "Based on what Congress is now considering, the deficit could be $100 billion or more next year than otherwise would it be if you just put Washington on autopilot. That is, if you made no changes to existing tax and spending policies, that would be almost 21% increase. It's obvious that our current fiscal policies are unsustainable." Mr. Speaker, I've been speaking for months and years about the waste of money in Afghanistan. And it's sad to me that we have been pouring money down a rat hole known as Afghanistan. We spent over $685 billion in Afghanistan in the last 14 years, and President Obama just entered into a bilateral security agreement with Afghanistan late last year that ties our nation to a failed policy for another 9 years. What have we gained there with over 2,000 American troops killed, over 20,000 wounded, and billions of dollars spent? My answer to my own question is nothing, absolutely nothing. A couple of weeks ago, I visited Walter Reed Army Medical Center to meet some of our veterans who had been wounded and are trying to heal. Some have wounds that will never truly heal. Congress owes it to them and all of our men and women who serve, and the American taxpayer, to have a serious debate about our future in Afghanistan. I think it's high time to leave Afghanistan. 9 more years is absolutely fruitless. Mr. Speaker, out of fairness to the American taxpayer and future generations, we can no longer delay the need to pay down our debt and work toward sounder economic policies. And our fairness to our veterans and in fairness to our veterans and the men and women who serve in the military, we need to have a serious debate about whether spending more money and time in Afghanistan. And Mr. Speaker, Afghanistan has been proven and is well known by historians the graveyard of empires. Is it worth it, Mr. Speaker? I think not. May God continue to bless our men and women in uniform, and may God continue to bless America. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair recognizes